In 4 years' time, airline passengers will match the bullet for speed in the first of the supersonic transports, Concorde. A triumph or another British aviation flop? Tonight, the future of a bird called Harmony.
I wish we'd never started Concorde. From a purely commercial point of view, it's not the kind of aircraft that the airlines want.
Well, the judges on this question are the airlines who are going to operate the aircraft. 14 major airlines have bought options.
I frankly cannot imagine a job I enjoy more than selling Concorde right now.
The Concorde, as I say, is just a start. We've got to look to possibly 4,000 miles an hour in the airliners, which will be developed from the present Concorde.
Concorde, the word means harmony, is an attempt to capture the air lanes for Britain and France, for long a market ruled by the Americans. In November 1962, the then Tory government and de Gaulle of France fathered a modern Icarus, a plane able to carry 2 busloads at Mach 2.2, 1,450 miles an hour, across the Atlantic at a height of 12 miles, where the sky is deep purple.
In the mood indigo, Concorde faces new hazards and problems in a hostile environment. Radiation from solar flares will force it to dive for the lower atmosphere. The outer skin will be heated by friction to 270 degrees. 4 inches inside that surface, the super jet set will sit in a specially cooled cabin. They'll feel a slight shudder when crossing the sound barrier.
The refined aerodynamics of Concorde took 10 years to perfect. It will ride on fixed delta wings to make the thin atmosphere dance.
The Olympus engines, British-made Bristol Siddeley, will drive Concorde with a 60-ton thrust. The needle-sharp nose is a distinguishing feature of Concorde. It's so sharp that it has to be padded in the factory so that workers don't impale themselves on it. For the subsonic speeds of takeoff and landing, it bows downwards. For the bullet speeds over the oceans, it sleeks itself to the fuselage. In 1968, the first British Concorde will be ready.
That was the dream, but there are many who say that reality has become an economic nightmare. For a plane which flies faster than the sun, Concorde has had an unsunny birth. Since Britain and France signed up together, both costs and tempers have risen.
At the start, the shared cost was £150 million. Since then, Concorde has been stretched to seat another 40 passengers to weigh another 40 tons.
And for that, the plane makers have been passing the hat round faster and faster. In July 1964, they said they needed £218 million. They got it.
3 months later, the British government played delicately at cancellation, convinced that they'd boobed in agreeing to an uncritical costing, an unworkable specification, and an unbreakable treaty. However, they stayed.
By May of last year, previous costs were thrown out of the window and diplomatically agreed to be historic. They rose to £400 million. And now the 2 companies concerned, the British Aircraft Corporation and Sud Aviation France, want £500 million. £5 a head for every man, woman and child in the 2 countries.
Why?
The Concorde must be regarded as the first step into the new age of supersonic transport.
Bernard Hurren is an aviation historian who's watched the birth of Concorde closely.
It's quite certain that there will be major developments all along the line once you've taken the initial step. But the initial step has to be taken.
But it's not simply a question of the prestige of being first in the field. The models of Concorde which glint in the boardrooms have about them the heady promise of a financial bonanza. Dr. A.E. Russell is coordinator of the British Concorde. Already 14 airlines have ordered it.
They've not done this without making a detailed analysis of the economics before taking this step. They've all decided they are going to make a profit.
Each Concorde will cost £5.75 million, with spares £7.5 million, and so far 69 have been ordered.
When we say 200 as our market estimate, this is being pessimistic.
For salesmen like Pat Burgess of the British Aircraft Corporation, a successful Concorde affects all our tomorrows.
I believe that we will sell over 200 Concordes. If we're slightly lucky, we could sell 400.
And for a real win,
If we're very lucky, I think the market would stand up to 800 airplanes of the Concorde size. In round figures, this would change our balance of payments situation by roughly £100 million a year for at least 10 years. And of course, the side effects of this are enormous.
For others, the side effects are already well enough known. They see Concorde as the latest and most disastrously expensive of Britain's gambles in the air. They see unhappy parallels with the TSR-2, the P-1127, and the other cancelled members of an aircraft industry which is dead but won't lie down.
they draw ominous conclusions from the fact that Concorde is being built in this vast hangar, where the doomed Brabazon was built and from where it flew, once. One such prophet is Mary Goldring, aviation correspondent of The Economist.
Now, already they've increased the size of Concorde quite a bit, and they've had to redesign the wing. They can't get it any bigger because we hadn't got the engines in this country. They can't get it any faster because they're up against limits on the materials. You see, we've got a disastrous and a very depressing record in Britain of always building aircraft that are too small and that to come on the market at the wrong time.
We did quite deliberately select the area in which we wish to attack this commercial selling in aviation. We must remember that this is an enormous growth industry. The turnover per annum is of the order of $2,000 million a year, the vast majority of which is done in the United States of America.
The whole well-being of the aircraft industry depends upon breaking into world's markets and gaining a reputation of being in the first league.
On January the 1st of this year, there was a special air at Toulouse in southern France. Here at the factory of Sud Aviation, 1967 will see the first Concorde completed. .001, the first prototype, nears the finishing post. The drills, which have bitten it into shape over 3 years, are working faster and faster. Here, more than anywhere, there's the feeling of a race.
The French, who work longer and for less pay than their Concorde workmates in England, will be the first to finish the supersonic airliner. 001 will fly on February the 28th, 1968, almost 6 years after the treaty signing.
J'ai une tête sympathique, moi, je suis pas comme vous. J'ai une gueule qui revient, moi, tu vois.
001 is a beast with a huge appetite. Already it's absorbed over a third of the entire French air industry, and for the critics this has a political significance.
When we started Concorde with the French, this was the last time round when we were trying to get into the common market. We signed a treaty with the French, and I think we would have signed a treaty for anything. It looked like the price of the entry ticket, and had we gone in, I think one would have said, well, it was cheap. Now we are completely tied by treaty. Now the English and the French factories really have to worry about selling the aircraft. At the moment, it's making work for them. It has become not an ordinary commercial aircraft, it's become a political aircraft. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Concorde make its first flight on schedule sometime in 1968, and then to have it cancelled.
But France will persist with the doggedness that used to be called English. They're prepared to go it alone, and if necessary, buy American engines to power their Concorde. Their temper's expressed by Jean Dufour, the chief executive of Sud Aviation.
I don't know of any project of cancellation of Concorde. I have never had the slightest doubt that this was not envisaged, and it has never been envisaged that France would abandon Concorde.
A fortnight ago, Concorde's two American rivals, the Lockheed L-2000 and the Boeing 733, wagged disdainful noses at the Anglo-French baby. First the Boeing.
Concorde is big, but it is dwarfed by the Boeing. The 733 is longer than a full-sized football pitch. It will carry 350 passengers, more than twice Concorde's payload. It will fly higher and faster at 1,800 miles an hour, but it shares Concorde's problems on range, a limit of 4,000 miles.
The Americans can't build it out of the known alloys which frame Concorde. They have to use stainless steel and titanium, metals which so far have been used only in advanced military aircraft to cope with the intense heat and friction at that speed. Boeing have plumped for the variable geometry wing, an advanced technological innovation. For the speeds which will sweep the Boeing from London to New York in 2.5 hours, the wings will be flush against the fuselage. They come forward for the low speeds of takeoff and landing.
This is, however, only a plywood aeroplane, a full-scale public relations mock-up, the research on which has already cost Boeing $35 million. The other American in the race was the Lockheed L-2000, in design the Concorde's big brother. Performance and promise very much the same as Boeing's. Lockheed's design manager is Harold Luskin.
Well, this airplane is nearly 300 feet long. The wing area is about 1/4 of an acre. The surfaces of this airplane are made out of a new material to aircraft construction called titanium. At cruising speed, all the surfaces of this aircraft will be heated to over 400 degrees. This airplane, under cruising conditions, stretches about 6 inches in length due to the increase in temperature.
The 1,600-strong research team on the Lockheed increased in temperature considerably on January the 1st of this year. President Johnson awarded the contract to the variable wing Boeing.
But already Boeing are 3 years behind Concorde and seemingly unconcerned. They'll wait until Concorde irons out all the beginner's problems.
A 2 or 3 year lead isn't going to help anyone to modify what they've already done. Now, a rather interesting point was brought out in the Wall Street Journal only this week. And if I may read, in this paper they say, because the Concorde will be available to the airlines 3 years before the American SST, many airlines have already ordered Concordes. Every additional year the Concorde is free of competition, this results in an adverse effect of $3.4 billion in the US balance of payments. Also, it will represent a $1.9 billion loss in sales of the American SST.
I am not so sure that the gap will be only 3 years. It might be slightly longer due to more difficulty that the Boeing project might find on its way than it's expected now. Nevertheless, even if the present programs stay as they are, which means only a 3 years gap, I believe this is enough for Concorde to make a very strong, take a very strong part of the market.
Boeing has the contract, but not yet the money. Rumors are that the cost of the Vietnam War might put Boeing 9 years behind Concorde. And have we only stolen a financial march?
Repeatedly in history, we've tried to go in and beat the Americans at their own game. And this, I believe, is the wrong thing to do. We must select the area in which we are prepared to make a stand. And in this particular occasion, we selected towards the fringe of our development capability. We have 40 years of experience in building in light alloy materials here in Europe. in staying at Mach 2.2, what we have done is we have forced the Americans to remain competitive. They have to move into a more refined, therefore more unknown material.
I've had recently an experience of 150 knot wind on the nose, which made me 40 minutes late into Bermuda.
Those already in service with Concorde for the moment prefer more placid birds. The Pheasant Inn on the outskirts of London Airport, and the local for the Concorde evaluation team, British pilots who'll fly Concorde in 2 years' time. Three of them met there earlier this month with the secretary of the British Airline Pilots Association for their regular chat about the big ones.
As you remember, the thing that worried us was the possibility of the nose sticking up, being unable to lower it for the landing, and visibility, I must admit, would have been pretty marginal with the early version.
I think as we've finished now, we've finished up with a visibility that's almost better than we've got at the present day, in fact, in the landing configuration.
When one talks about the vast amount of money that's been spent on the Concorde program, this is really not going to touch the real money that's got to be spent in the operational environment of the aeroplane.
Well, there's one other thing that comes into this forecasting, and that's radiation and ozone. What do you think about that?
The authorities are considering that crew members who spend a long time at these altitudes can wear radiation badges, which sum up the amount of radiation you achieve over the months. I'm just a wee bit worried about this, only as far as we're concerned, not as the passenger.
The only thing I can see we're going to have difficulty is at the top of descent, which is a very critical phase when 1 or 2 seconds will make all the difference in whether you arrive several thousand feet too high or too low.
You remember, too, we were told that if you start your supersonic climb 150 miles late, you've lost something like 500 miles range.
Well, this is one of the handling problems. What about the other handling problems, especially in the takeoff and landing?
Well, we've always been a little worried, I suppose, about the landing case with the Delta. Previous aircraft have been stable on the approach, but the Delta can be unstable. But we've learned, looking into this problem, that the figures are on our side. The supersonic Delta has so much excess power available to fly supersonically. So I rather feel that it's going to be a very nice aeroplane to fly.
But the Concorde itself will probably prove to be, indeed any SS2, probably prove to be the safest airplane that ever got off the ground.
And what would you like to do? Would you want to fly this aeroplane or not?
Oh, yes, yes. There's quite a lot of discussion amongst the people. Some say, give me the jumbo jet. Others say, I'd like to go onto the supersonic. I can only echo what Will Brown, one of the American pilots, said when we were looking at some of the bits and pieces of the Concorde at Bristol. And he turned to me and said, Rod, you know, I can hardly wait to get my hands on this baby. And really, this sums up how I feel. I'd love to fly this thing.
Yes, I think this is going pretty well for all professional pilots.
Well,
whose turn?
What are you all looking at me for?
The technical problems of Concorde can be discussed amicably, but can the social ones, one of which is noise? For the man who lives nearest the end of London's main runway, aircraft are a curse.
It gets worse every year. Every plane they bring in makes it worse. It definitely gets worse every year. It gets like that there. Well, sometimes I sit in there on my own. And I don't get that bloody wild, I know where to turn the telly off and go to bed, I'll leave it on. I've counted them. 22 aeroplanes standing out there waiting to take off, all with their bloody engines running. When you get it at night, some of these what's loaded with freight, cool, the air they kick up then trying to get off the bloody ground. There's no passengers. I mean, I've been here long enough to know a passenger from air freight, but you get air freight out there. When he's loaded, he stands out here. When he moves, cool, what he kicks up then, oh, terrible.
When Concorde unzips the heavens, that may appear trifling. There's been little research into the question of what happens when it throws its 150 tons to Mach 2.2.
But what we do know is that we're running into quite a new problem. It's not only noise around airports where you get a group of people who complain, but after all they're a small number. It's this thing that's rather delicately called a noise carpet, which is a solid wall of sound that rolls along underneath the aircraft all the way along its route. It's not clear how wide it could be, but it could be anything up to 80 or 100 miles wide. Flying over land, this means that you will disturb city after city after city. The only people who have done really serious research on this are the Americans, because they are the only people who've got really big aircraft flying supersonically. They've been using a bomber, B-58, which is, I suppose, about half the size of Concorde. But now they're beginning to use a much bigger one, which is B-70. And the last I heard from Washington is that the measurements they're getting off this is very disturbing indeed. It's suggesting that the noise will be so loud and the pressure wave hitting the ground will have so much force in it that no supersonic flying can be allowed over land either by day or by night.
Because of the noise carpet, Concorde will only fly supersonic over the high seas. Even so, the options on buying are rising daily. Yesterday, Pan American was reported to be doubling its take to 16 Concordes.
The greatest threat to the fast Delta will come not from hazards or doubts, but from this. The jumbo jet. Lockheed, they also ran in the American supersonic race, have gone in for bulk.
Research on the Lockheed 500 transport is concentrated on developing a mammoth jetliner, one capable of tucking away 22 busloads of passengers in first-class cabins. An all-tourist version would carry over 800 people.
The jumbo jets are likely to be in service by 1970, perhaps 6 months before Concorde.
Now, when you put the number of seats up to 500, immediately you start getting very low costs. And the optimists are talking about the possibility of cutting fares by round about a third on today's fares. Now, of course, this is all very exciting, certainly from a passenger's point of view. But you've got to remember that it means if you're comparing a 500-seat slow jet and a 130 or even a 350-seat supersonic jet, you're now comparing two aircraft, and there is a 50% difference in their costs. But now what we don't know is exactly who and how many people are going to pay 50% more for their ticket just in order to cross the Atlantic in half the present time. There's always a prestige market. But the way first-class travel's been going recently, that prestige market is pretty small. The most likely thing is that what the airlines would have to do is to subsidize the supersonic tickets out of the profits that they'll earn with these big jumbo jets. Well, I think that's damned unfair on the passengers. Why shouldn't the low cost be passed on to the passenger? Why should they have to subsidize people who want to fly supersonic?
I would like to make the point the fare differential will go on to supersonic fares, not because the SST is uneconomic, but because it is inconceivable to imagine how one is going to get passengers onto a subsonic aeroplane if a supersonic aeroplane offers a seat on the same route.
Well, you see, the most interesting thing about any journey, whether by ship or car or rail or particularly aircraft, is, and I think this is the back of everybody's mind, is when do we get there? And what they really mean is when is the misery over, or when are we no longer putting ourselves at hazard? Well, now, demonstrably, if you can fly the Atlantic in 3 hours instead of 6 hours or more, then you are putting yourself at hazard for only 3 hours instead of 6 hours, and you're extraordinarily relieved to have done it.
I don't see why even we couldn't think about Concorde, which would be twice as big, let's say an Airbus, a supersonic Airbus, really, which might be very interesting to look into, and which might prove to be the concept of the future.